4020.
The problem was we found out, welcome to 4020 podcast, is we're going to talk about the 2000 World Cup, but with two men who were there. I was a media student at this point. I was the most improved media student at Wakefield College. How good's that? Which eventually made me listen to Team Talk 252, where I won this book from these two gentlemen.
Yes.
I've got the compliment slip still as well. I've lost a little thing with your pictures in, which is, well, not Phil's picture, he wasn't in there, but you and some of your colleagues, Jonathan. So I will look for that. But Jonathan Doidge is here because we're going to talk about the Rugby League World Cup in the year 2000, which I had a false memory. I, in my mind, believed John Inverdale was stood at Windsor Park in Belfast in front of no one in the rain. And then when I watched the game back yesterday, watched the start back, it was Steve Ryder. So immediately, this is a complete disaster of a thing. What were you doing there, Jonathan? What was your role within the 2000 World Cup?
Well, I mean, what I remember of that first day, particular, I think Phil and I had agreed that we were going to meet at Twickenham for the England-Australia match. And frantically at the last minute, being relatively new to media myself, I'd only been doing stuff for 2 or 3 years. So it was my first World Cup in that respect. It was low budget stuff, so it was a case of just find the cheapest hotel you can, Doidge, get yourself down to London, and you can cover that game. So I booked into a services at Heston on the M4, right at the start of the M4, so that I could get across to Twickenham and watch that first match in the afternoon from the comfort of my hotel room. I managed to get an early check-in. I can remember that much. Early check-in. I had to email him about 4 times to persuade him to let me in the room, watch the match, which was obviously, unfortunately, very low-key beginnings. And that sort of set the tone for what was to come, didn't it? And then we zipped across through the traffic of London to get to Twickers for that opening night.
How did you end up at Twickenham, Phil? You didn't? I'm assuming, because I know you drove there and back in the day. You didn't stay at a hotel in Denport.
No, I think we just need to revisit the overall impression of this World Cup, because clearly the issues it had were it very nearly bankrupted rugby league. It rained virtually every single day there was a game, wherever the game was on. It was, I think, one of the wettest autumns on record by the time it got to the final at Old Trafford. There was over-ambition about where the games were going to be played. However, I think it is a much maligned World Cup because the highlights of it still are pretty much spectacular. It started in the worst possible way. I mean, we should never have been at Twickenham anyway. You know, we're talking about the Rugby League World Cup. What the hell are we doing playing England at Twickenham? But just to highlight some things that I remember, and as we've already said, few and far between, given my age. Hazem El Masri's press conference after Lebanon had played is a highlight that I'll never forget. Going to Ireland in midweek to watch Ireland and Scotland, which again, very few people there, but seemed really exotic at the time. There was I think the quarter-final, a semi-final, and the final itself are incredibly memorable. The quarter-final between England and Ireland at Headingley, where there were something. I mean, again, I should have checked what the crowd was, but it's clearly into 5 figures.
15,405. I was one of them.
Fantastic atmosphere and a really good game. You know, we had an Ireland team there that if we'd kept that going another 25 years, we would have been talking about Ireland being a major player in rugby league over here. That was a great game in a fantastic atmosphere. The semi-final at Huddersfield between Australia and Wales. I've never known a press box like it at half time. Now, Wales ahead against the might of Australia, and every single press person in the McAlpine press box stood up and banged the desk and cheered the Welsh in at half time. We knew they probably wouldn't be able to sustain it, but it looked as though it was going to be the biggest upset of all time. And then I think the final doesn't get enough recognition. It was a fantastic high quality game at Old Trafford. And I think, again, something like 67,000 people there, if you're going to say now there were
44 says Wikipedia.
Yeah.
But,
all right.
It'll look good on the telly.
Considering it was Australia and New Zealand and England had been woeful in the semis. And But I think up to about the hour mark, New Zealand were well in contention for winning that game. But the quality we were watching again was something we didn't see on a regular basis on this side of the world. And although the Aussies ran away with it in the last 20 minutes, those are the things that I can remember. Some very long journeys to games, a couple of double headers. But I think it needs reevaluating. It was better than you think.
Was the hotel better than you thought? That's the question. That's for you, Doidge.
The hotel in Dublin wasn't. I remember that.
The hotel was nothing special, no. But I think the reason I stopped there, barring the fact that it was just a paid-for hotel, was that I think we were going straight. Did we not go straight to the Millennium Stadium from there the following day? Yes, for the double header, where that was the first real indicator that we were in trouble weather-wise, wasn't it? Because they closed the roof for one of the first times at that stadium. And there was just obviously a little pinhole in it where the join was right over the centre spot. And that's what sticks out most of the memory of that match. Sorry about the game, but it was just like when your shower head is just going on one constant, trickle. And it was for the entire match. So I seem to remember, Phil, and you'll correct me, I'm sure, if I'm wrong, but I think they moved the kickoff a little bit to the right or whatever of the centre spot so they could actually kick the ball without getting absolutely drenched. And anybody who ran anywhere near that during the match, you just got a free shower. So that was that early indicator. Go on.
I was going to say the only thing that was a double header, and again everybody was saying, "Oh, the crowd's up." You're going to tell me that I got the crowd wrong. I think it was about 17,000, which was
17,612,
which was the highest they'd ever been for I think a Welsh game on Welsh soil. So again, that we probably put it in a stadium that was far too big, but the actual crowd that turned out was pretty impressive. But it was the game before that, the Lebanon game, that that was the first time we'd seen Lebanon, and that was pretty groundbreaking that a team from the Middle East was in our World Cup, and so the comment from Mr. El Masri will forever remain with me, because there were quite a few Aussie journalists over, and one or two of them were trying to make out that this was just a heritage team, and what link did it possibly have with Lebanon? It was manufactured, and surely that even Hazim El Masri could see that he couldn't get in the Australian team, so he was playing for his second choice, and he just calmly and quietly sat there and said, my parents were born in Lebanon. Do you think they were going to wait around there for rugby league to be invented? The best thing that obviously they could do at the time of a war was try and get out to a country like Australia, which welcomed us in. And we couldn't be prouder and happier to be playing and representing our homeland of Lebanon. And suddenly that's when I thought, heritage players are there's no question over their commitment to the nations that they play for. And I just thought the way he put them down and elevated the reason why Lebanon were there justified a 5-hour drive back home in the pouring rain when we were soaked to the skin.
Phil had regular sunbeds to make it look like that things had been, conditions had been better. Rich, I've got to say, just looking through on my phone now the fixtures, I was just trying to remember exactly which games I went to. That there were some that stick out in the mind. And the one or two that I'd forgotten I was at, actually, I've got to say. But we didn't go straight from that London weekend to the Millennium Stadium. We went to Kingsholm to Gloucester the following day. That was right. And then New Zealand hammered the Lebanon, didn't they? 64-0, according to the stats I've got in front of me. Was that a double header as well?
No, I think that was a single game. I think my feet are still wet from that game.
Correct. It was a single header.
The game at the Millennium.
Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say the game at the Millennium, which was probably about a week later, I think, probably the following. It was a Sunday, I think, at the Millennium. That was a draw, wasn't it? That 22-all draw between the Cook Islands and the Lebanon, and that was probably the first time that we'd had one of those sort of games during the comp, from what I can remember, and we all got excited. And I agree. I mean, I know I mentioned the weather at the top of the piece, and the sort of it just felt a bit low key, did that first day compared to what it been, but it was very exciting to be a young, well, relatively young Joe, dashing around all these places covering rugby league games, which is what I'd always wanted to do. And I was lucky enough to get on to do two or three of the matches for the BBC on the radio. But most of my work, as you'll recall, was with Team Talk during that and at the Rugby League page. And it was a case of go where you like, mate. So I did, or we did. We went to quite a lot of games together, didn't we, Phil?
Yes. I can remember racking up the mileage, but it was fun because it was a World Cup, and yes, we'd had one in '95, and that had been quite exciting because I think that was the first one where we started to get a proliferation of nations. So I can't remember if you were with me in '95. We went to Keighley to watch South Africa make their debut, and they played Fiji. Who were coached by Graham Murray, and that was the first time we'd came across him. So we'd been imbued by the spirit of the fact that more and more nations were playing rugby league, and as you know, being passionate fans of the sport and wanting as many people to witness it as we could. That was nirvana for me. Yes, England winning it would have been absolutely fantastic, but getting to go and see Lebanon play the Cook Islands and you know. I say the germinations of Scotland when they were playing in Ireland, but you know, all of that I think was why we were just excited about it, and I think yes, Lincoln Financial sponsored it if I remember, which again was a major name coming into the sport, who were new to the game, and we were thinking this is the takeoff. This is international rugby league is now going to be, you know, primary in the sport. Super League was big at the time. You know, it was that around about the 2000, and it was really hitting its straps. It had started, you know, 5 years before, and a lot of the players that we were seeing play for, you know, like Leslie Vainikolo was playing for New Zealand, was starring at Bradford at the time. So we knew a lot of the players that were playing for the nations, and it was just incredibly exciting. And then you write the history of it, and you go, yeah, it was terrible. Weather was crap. The finances were awful. But actually, I loved it. As you say, traveling around watching international rugby league is just such fun.
What went wrong for England?
Good question. Is that now? I remember the semi final that night where they got a pasting, didn't they, at the Reebok? Was it Richie Barnett was brilliant for the Kiwis, from what I can remember. Again, a lot of awful weather. Don't think we got off to the greatest of starts, and it just went from bad to worse, didn't it, that night? Unfortunately, 49-6 the final score. And I think we'd all kind of gone in there. We'd had the tougher of the two quarterfinals. That was one of the matches I covered for the Beeb, the Ireland-England quarterfinal, which was a really good game to cover. I do remember, and I think we sort of went in there with optimism that yeah, okay, we know New Zealand are a good side here, but we've had the tougher of the quarterfinals, so that'll prepare us nicely for this game. Let's get in there and hit the ground running. And unfortunately, they did. And you know, we had the floor wiped at us in that match, unfortunately. And so I suppose there's that tendency to navel gaze after the national side have suffered defeat, not only defeat, you know, in a big game like a World Cup semi-final. And then, like Phil says, I think the final itself ended up being a much better game than that final score suggests.
I think the other thing about England was John Keir was the coach, and I seem to remember he was keen to promote youth. So people like Kevin Sinfield were in the squad. So we were at that sort of point where a lot of the things we said about what's just happened in the Ashes series still applied. We play too many games. We don't play games of enough intensity. We're not able to back up one good performance with another. And I think that caught us out in the semi. The embarrassing thing was the margin of defeat. I think, yeah, we were looking forward to maybe going to Old Trafford for an England-Australia final, but New Zealand were too good, but were way too good. And I think that set us back a little bit as well and jaundiced people's opinions of how good or bad the tournament had been. But I think overall, am I right in thinking John took the squad to America to prepare? And that hadn't really happened before. It looked like we were putting some genuine resource behind our preparation of our international team. But again, we'd had a long season. We played Russia, I think, in a group game, and again, a lot of the kids were given their debuts in that, and I think we felt that the future of England Rugby League was quite positive until we got to that moment in the semi-final when we realised still how far we were behind Australia and New Zealand. But no, I just think that semi turned out to be one game too far. BBC built it up because they and I think, yeah, was it Saturday night, and we let the nation down quite badly.
Yeah, it was a disappointment. There's no two ways about that. But the highlights of the games that really stick out. I remember going up to Gateshead, Australia against, was that Russia or Fiji? I think it might have been Fiji, and they were brilliant. I mean, it was just a joy to watch Australia. They were so crisp. I remember moving the ball about. And Fiji, we know all about that sort of that passion and all the rest of it that they play with. I think there might have been a couple of early scores, but then they played pretty well for a little while. But the Aussies just did the usual thing of soaking up a little bit of pressure, and then it was just like an exhibition match. I seem to remember that for sort of half the first half and all the second, and they could have had quite a few more scores. And I remember coming away from that thinking, I've seen something, pretty special in terms of the players here. And they also, I did the match against Samoa at Vicarage Road. That was just doing some score updates. And I think Samoa again played pretty well for quite a while in that, but the Aussies just did the same thing. I think that was a similar blowout scoreline in the end. So when it's not against your team, of course, it's a different thing, isn't it? And you're just watching, some of the world's greats at the time doing their thing in conditions that, let's face it, are alien to them, and they're still able to adapt and play rugby league football in the best way they can in some pretty treacherous conditions. Lord only knows, lads, what it would have been like if it had been a dry autumn and handling would have been easy.
We might find out next year.
We might.
Was that a quarter final, if I remember rightly?
It was. I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
Because I think I
remember going down with Mike Latham.
Yeah.
I took Mike Latham with me all the way down there.
I think I went to Castleford. There was a semi-final between New Zealand and France.
Yeah.
And that was one of the worst games of the competition. I can remember that.
I remember being so excited after Ireland, England. I thought, I might go to Castleford the next day, and then I didn't, and that was not a bad decision. The amount of future coaches in that England squad: Paul Wellens, Chev Walker, Kevin Sinfield, Keith Senior, Paul Rowley, Leon Price, Jamie Peacock, Chris Radlinski, coaches and officials and things, Sean Long, Paul Deacon, Paul Anderson, Andy Fowle. Don't know what happened to him. Some names in that squad. And as you say, promoting youth.
No, it was a good squad, and it was emerging as well. There were, as I said, when John Keir took over, I think he made a conscious decision that things sort of needed to change, and we'd had that disastrous tour to New Zealand, PNG, and Fiji in '96 when we were so bankrupt we had to send a third of the squad home before the final test, which was a real crass decision and one of the low points of international rugby league. Then we obviously had the Super League war, whereby although the Aussies came over in '97, it wasn't a full team. And we felt that international rugby league was perhaps being sidelined because they needed to build this domestic competition after the resources that had been lost domestically to put that back on the pedestal that it needed to be. And international rugby league had sort of been sacrificed on the back of that. So I think the 2000 World Cup was the first time where we thought, yeah, somebody is starting to take international rugby league seriously. We've always thought this has to be the pinnacle of the game, has to sell the game to a wider audience. And I think John Keir thought, I need to change some personnel as well. There's a new generation of players starting to make their name in Super League. I need to pick some of them. I think it did backfire at the end. As I said, I'm not sure they were ready to play the number of games at the level that they needed to play over the course of sort of 3 weeks. But yeah, when you read out that team, gosh, yeah, some generational names in that.
When we're talking about that World Cup as well, Phil, it both of you, it was probably the last home World Cup where all the media, the nationals had a rugby league journalist, because by the time it came back here in 2013, yes, there were probably still a percentage of those, but that had already started to fragment. So in terms of the profile of the game, it was still getting full coverage, and unfortunately, of course, that meant more of a focus on England's issues in the semi-final, and the fact that the Aussies had won it yet again, and all of that. And it's obviously a shame for the game that there isn't more of that now, and hasn't been in the years since. International Rugby League has definitely changed over the course of that. This was, well, probably you'd argue 95 was the roots of where we're at now with the Pacific nations. But this had carried it on a little bit further. Of course, we had the New Zealand Maori team, didn't we, in this World Cup as well? So there were accusations of just trying to pick up any old side, a bit like getting together your Sabutio team and having a select 11 or select 13 from various different quarters to make up a team to play in it. They didn't do badly, but other memories, while I can actually remember them, I do remember covering the Fiji-England game again for doing the commentary on that at Headingley. And you mentioned Graham Murray, Phil, which triggered off that memory, because I'd written all the teams down, and I just remember, obviously, I'd got to know Graham a little bit from being sent to do the interviews with him in the old caretaker's bungalow at Headingley on a Thursday morning, or even right here in Horsforth where I'm sitting at the old Fat Franco's restaurant, because the Leeds Rhinos players used to go there for their pasta lunch on a Thursday, and that's when you'd often get sent along with your recording kit. So he was a lovely, relaxed sort of guy, as I'm sure you'll testify. And I went from the commentary position in the old North Stand at Headingley, probably a little bit nervous at the time. It's England against Fiji, big game for me to do at Headingley in a World Cup, and I had to sort of venture into the tunnel to try and find out how to pronounce these Fijian players' names, and I wanted to write them out phonetically, so out of respect for them, so that I didn't get it wrong, and I was doing a professional job. And I knocked on the door, and one of the trainers came out and said, "Yeah, mate," and I said, "Yeah, explain what I wanted to do." And he said, "All right," and he just went back in the room, and I thought, does that mean he's ignoring me? Does that mean he's... And sort of 2 minutes passed or whatever, and then the door opens, and I'm still standing there a bit like a spare one at a wedding. And who walks out but Graham Murray? And he just smiled and said, "What can I do for you?" And I just said, "Can you just give me the pronunciations of your team?" And he actually said words to the effect of, "I'm not too sure myself. I think he's called Thacker. That was the one that was spelt Kaka. That's the one that sticks out." And he gave me a few others, and he just said, "Mate, just relax, do your best." And I thought, okay, well, I tried, and that it obviously made me smile, as it still does now. That sort of relaxed environment was how he got his players to play for him. And I did feel a lot better about the fact that I still probably pronounced half the Fijian team wrong, but their coach wasn't that bothered about it, and nobody was going to have a pop at me for doing so.
As long as you did your best, that's all that matters. You tried, you made the effort. At least you got to speak to a coach in the tunnel at Headingley. Phil, we're about to run out of time. So, what is the what is the epitaph for the 2000 World Cup? It wasn't as bad as you thought it was.
Yeah, that's a good line. I think if anybody's got the chance to go back and have a look at that Ireland team that played England in the quarter-final at Headingley, and you think what might have been on the back of that, just throwing a few names in that I can remember. I think Steve Prescott played for them. Obviously Barry McDermott, Terry O'Connor, Luke Ricketson. It was a fantastic star-studded team, and I genuinely stood there at Headingley thinking, great, England have won, fantastic, it's been a competitive game, what a wonderful atmosphere, but the long-term prognosis for international rugby league in the Northern Hemisphere can only be good if players like this are prepared to commit to that nation, and we can build on that and perhaps take it into a domestic setting. As I say, I've been to Dublin to watch them play on home soil, and whilst there weren't a lot of people there, suddenly people like Barry were starting to get recognised by the Irish public. He was very, very proud to pull on that green jersey. And here we are 25 years later thinking, oh, if only we'd done that right, Northern Hemisphere Rugby League wouldn't be in the sad state that it is at the moment.
Terry O'Connor, Brian Carney, Chris Joynt, Great Britain's Michael Withers, Ryan Sheridan, all famous names. Yeah, what a team. Because, go on, sorry, Doidge, go on.
Just like two very quick memories for me to finish with. The two standouts for me, obviously working at a World Cup final for the first time as a journalist was brilliant, just to be in that stadium, see those great players, whatever the result. And the other one would have been the Wales-Australia game. I mean, just for a few moments of your life, you saw a British player, I'm going to call him British, Lee Briers. He was outstanding that night. It was just one of the greatest exhibitions of ball playing you'll see from a British player against any Aussie in my lifetime watching the game. Just for a few seconds, you thought, maybe, before the reality kicked in. It was fantastic that night. Brilliant atmosphere, great game.
Thanks for joining us. Oh, go on,
a British player who never played for Great Britain.
Yeah.
Before
that's another podcast now.
before it cuts us off, what would Eddie Waring have made of it? Because we're disappointed you haven't not done Eddie Waring yet.
Oh, right. Well, fantastic display by Lee Briers, and should be playing for Great Britain on the next tour down under.